The flow of the dragon. The dojo was plunged into a heavy silence, broken only by the rhythmic sound of students breathing and the soft rustle of cotton gis. It was one of those nights when the air seemed charged with electricity, as if space itself was waiting for something great. Bruce Lee moved between the practitioners with the lightness of a breeze, correcting postures, adjusting blows, but without ever interrupting the flow. His movements were liquid, a precise dance where each gesture was born from the previous one without apparent effort. It was like watching a river meander between rocks, inevitable, graceful, relentless. Tadashi Yamashita, a renowned Okinawan karateka, watched everything with half-closed eyes, his arms crossed over his chest. He had traveled to Los Angeles not just to train, but to test himself against the best. And there was Bruce, the man who defied convention, who mixed Wing Chun with boxing, fencing, and even dancing. Yamashita was a traditionalist, a Shorin-ryu master who believed in the purity of forms, in the rigidity of katas as the backbone of the art. But at that moment, as Bruce demonstrated a chain of kicks and punches, something inside him stirred. He's good, Yamashita thought, but there's something strange. Bruce stopped suddenly, as if he had read her mind. His dark eyes sparkled with a flash of amusement. You think I'm too fluid, don't you? He asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Yamashita didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped forward and assumed a kibidachi stance, his fists clenched at his sides. In karate, strength comes from the roots. From the earth. You seem to float. Bruce smiled, that quick smile that lit up his face like lightning. What if I told you that the root is not in the earth, but in the void? That true strength is not holding on, but letting go? Before Yamashita could retort, Bruce spun in a circular motion, his right foot describing a perfect arc in the air before lightly touching the karateka's shoulder. It wasn't a strong blow, but the impact made Yamashita take a half step back in surprise. Not by strength, but by precision. It was as if Bruce had anticipated his every reaction before he even had them. You swear you're softer than me? Bruce teased, stepping back with a bouncy step. Then prove it. Yamashita felt defiance burn in his chest. He was a man of honor, a master who had dedicated decades to the path of Budo. I couldn't back down. With a low growl, he advanced, launching a gyakuzuki straight into Bruce's face. The punch was quick, precise, loaded with the weight of years of training. Bruce dodged with minimal movement, as if his head were pulled by an invisible thread. The punch missed his nose, and before Yamashita could retreat, Bruce was within his guard, a light elbow grazing his rib, a knee rising toward his hip. These were not blows to hurt, but to show, to prove that distance, time, and intention could be manipulated like clay in the hands of a potter. Yamashita tried to counterattack, but his every movement seemed to find only air. Bruce didn't block, he redirected. He didn't fight, he drove. And then, in an instant, the karateka felt his legs being swept by a quick, circular motion, and suddenly he was on the mat, staring up at the dojo ceiling, the air escaping his lungs in a gasp. Bruce reached out his hand to help him up, but Yamashita ignored the gesture. He stood on his own, shaking off the dust on his gi, his eyes fixed on Bruce with a mixture of frustration and fascination. Korewa, he murmured, shaking his head. That's not karate. No, Bruce agreed, crossing his arms. It's Jeet Kune Do. The path of the intercepting fist. But it's not about the art. It's about you. About how you move, how you think, how you feel. Yamashita took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the words. He had come to prove something, to reaffirm his belief in tradition. But there, faced with this man who seemed to defy all rules, he realized that perhaps true mastery lay not in following a path, but in creating your own. Show me more, he finally said, his voice firm. Bruce smiled, that smile that now seemed less of a challenge and more of an invitation. Then come, he replied, assuming a relaxed posture, his arms loose at his sides. Let's flow. The path of the void. The first blows came without warning. Bruce didn't move like a martial arts master. There were no ki, no rigid stances, not even the shadow of a kata. Just a sidestep, a turn of the hip, and Yamashita's fist was deflected with an almost casual touch, as if a breeze had pushed his arm away. Before he could react, Bruce's elbow grazed his chin, not hard, but with enough precision to make him stagger. "You're thinking too much," Bruce said, stepping back. "Karate teaches you to block, to counterattack, to follow the kata. But combat is not a dance. It's chaos." Yamashita gritted his teeth. He had spent decades perfecting every movement, every breath, every transition between techniques. And now, faced with this man who refused to follow any rules, he felt like a student again. "So how do you fight without form?" he asked, his voice low, almost a challenge. Bruce didn't respond with words. Instead, it moved forward again, this time faster. Yamashita blocked on instinct, but the next blow came from an impossible angle, a roundhouse kick he had never seen before, deflecting at the last second to hit his ribs. The pain was acute, but what bothered him most was the feeling that, even though he had anticipated the attack, there was no way to stop it. "You're under arrest," Bruce said, backing away again. Trapped in his own technique. Jeet Kune Do is not an art. It's a tool. And tools have no pride. Yamashita took a deep breath, feeling sweat running down his temples. He could continue fighting as he always had, with discipline, with honor, with the certainty that the traditional path was the only true one. But something inside him, something he had buried under years of rigorous training, was beginning to stir. Then, for the first time in decades, he set aside the kata. There was no warning. There was no preparation. Just an impulse, his body moving not like a karateka but like an animal, instinctive, unpredictable. His fist flew towards Bruce's face, but instead of blocking, the American leaned back, letting the blow pass inches from his nose. Before Yamashita could step back, Bruce spun, his foot sweeping across the Japanese man's legs. The world turned upside down. Yamashita fell with a thud, the air escaping from his lungs. For a moment, he stood there, looking at the dojo ceiling, feeling the weight of defeat. But then, to his surprise, there was no anger. There was no shame. Just a strange clarity. Bruce reached out his hand, helping him up. "Now you're starting to understand," he said, smiling. Yamashita wiped the blood from his lip with the back of his hand. He was no longer the same man who had entered that dojo hours before. Something had changed, not in his technique, but in his soul. "It's not Jeet Kune Do yet," he muttered. "No," Bruce agreed. "But it's not karate anymore either." And for the first time, Yamashita smiled. There was nothing left to prove. There were no more paths to follow. Just emptiness, and the freedom to fill it however you wanted. Yamashita remained at the dojo for a few more weeks, not as a student, nor as a rival, but as a silent presence. I watched Bruce train, absorbing not the moves but the philosophy behind them. Sometimes the two would face each other again, but there was no longer the tension there was before. They were just two men testing limits, with no destination, no victory to achieve. One day, Bruce found him sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, looking at his hands. "You're leaving," Bruce said, not as a question, but as an observation. Yamashita didn't deny it. He stood up, shook the dust off his gi and nodded. "There's nothing left here for me." Bruce didn't try to stop him. He just extended his arm, and Yamashita squeezed his forearm in a gesture that didn't belong to any martial art, but that carried the weight of everything they had shared. "What are you going to do?" Bruce asked, even though he already knew the answer. "I'll teach you," Yamashita replied. "But not what I was taught. I will teach what I learned." Bruce smiled, satisfied. So it wasn't a defeat. No, Yamashita agreed. It was a start. And so, without dramatic goodbyes, he left. The dojo became emptier, but also lighter, as if a shadow that had accompanied it for a long time had finally dissipated. Years later, In a small town in the interior of Japan, a group of young people met in a warehouse adapted for training. There were no banners, no rigid hierarchies, no oaths of loyalty to a lineage. Just bodies in motion, controlled breathing, and the search for something that couldn't be named. Yamashita watched from the doorway, her gray hair now longer, tied in a loose bun. One of the students, a girl no more than 15 years old, called him. "Sensei, aren't you going to train today?" He shook his head, smiling. "Not today. Today I'm just going to watch." And for the first time in decades, he felt at peace. Not because I had found answers, but because I had stopped looking for them. The emptiness that once haunted him was now just space, to breathe, to make mistakes, to be. Outside, the wind blew through the trees, and for a moment, Yamashita thought he heard the echo of a familiar laugh. But when he looked around, there was no one. Then he closed his eyes and let the sound dissipate, like everything else. The last kata. The dojo was silent except for the rhythmic sound of bare feet on the mat and the rustle of students' hakama. Yamashita remained at the door, arms crossed, watching. The girl who had called him Rina, he remembered, performed a kata with mechanical precision but without soul. He recognized the rigidity in her shoulders, the same one that had consumed him for years, the quest for perfection as a shield against the fear of failure. One of the younger boys, Kenji, tripped in mid-motion and fell to his knees, embarrassed. Rina stopped, her lips pressed into a thin line. Before he could reprimand him, Yamashita entered the dojo. "Continue," he said, his voice low but firm. "The kata is not about not falling. It's about how you get up." Kenji hesitated, but Rina stared at him defiantly. "Sensei, if he doesn't practice properly, he'll never learn." Yamashita walked to the center of the mat. The students instinctively moved away, as if the space around him had become sacred. "Learn what?" he asked, looking at Rina. "Repeating movements? Following rules?" He extended his hand to Kenji, helping him to stand up. True training begins when you understand that there is no right or wrong. There is only what you do with what is given to you. Rina crossed her arms. "That's not what you always taught us." "I was wrong." The silence that followed was heavy. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Yamashita took a deep breath, feeling the weight of decades of rigidity lift off his shoulders. It wasn't just about him. It was about all of them, about how the fear of making mistakes kept them trapped in a prison of expectations. "Today," he said, "we're going to train something different." He positioned himself in the center of the dojo and closed his eyes. For a moment, the students thought he was meditating, but then his arms moved, slow and fluid, as if pulled by invisible threads. It wasn't any kata they knew. There was no name for it. It was just pure movement, born of instinct, of body memory, of that which could not be taught, only felt. The students watched him, fascinated and confused. Kenji was the first to try to imitate, his arms shaking but determined. Rina hesitated, then joined him, her movements stiff at first but slowly gaining fluidity. One by one, the others followed, until the dojo was filled with moving bodies, each finding their own rhythm. Yamashita opened his eyes. There was no longer a need to teach. They were already learning. The echo that didn't dissipate. The following days were strange. Yamashita woke up before dawn, as always, but instead of getting lost in thoughts about past techniques or masters, he simply walked. For the first time in years, he didn't carry the weight of the search with him. The void that once suffocated him was now an open space, like the sky before the rain. But something still bothered him. It was laughter. Whenever he closed his eyes, he heard it, lightly, almost childishly, as if someone was playing behind him. Once, he turned so quickly that he almost lost his balance, sure he would see someone there. But there was no one. Just the wind, the trees, the silence. On the third day, he decided to follow the sound. He left the dojo behind and walked through the forest that bordered the city, following the echo as if it were an invisible thread. The trees were older there, the branches twisted like the hands of ancients. The air smelled of damp earth and rotting leaves. Then, among the shadows, he saw her. A small figure, sitting on a moss-covered rock, swinging its legs like a child. Her hair was long and dark, tied in a loose braid, and she wore a faded blue kimono, embroidered with flowers that no longer had any color. When he saw him, he smiled. "It took a while," she said. Yamashita stopped. His heart was beating hard, but not from fear. Of something older, deeper. "I know you," he murmured. "Of course you do," she laughed, jumping off the rock. "You just forgot." He closed his eyes. Fragmented memories surfaced, a schoolyard, small hands holding yours, the sound of laughter as you ran through the rain. A promise made a long time ago, so old that the words had been lost in time. "You were my sister," he said finally. "And you were my brother," she replied, extending her hand. "But you've grown up. And I don't." Yamashita looked at her hand. Small, pale, as if made of porcelain. He knew that if he touched her, something would change. Maybe forever. "Why now?" he asked. "Because you stopped looking," she said simply. "And only then could you find me." He hesitated, then took her hand. It was cold, but not unpleasant. Like the first breath of wind after a long winter. "What happens now?" he asked. She smiled, pulling him forward. "Now, you come with me." They walked together through the forest, their steps light, as if they were floating over the earth. Yamashita didn't look back. There was nothing left to be left behind. When they reached a small lake, the calm waters reflecting the gray sky, she stopped. "Here," she said. "Here what?" "The place where everything ends. And where it all starts." Yamashita looked at the water. His reflection was there, but next to him, there was another, younger, lighter, as if time hadn't touched him. "I don't want to go," he said suddenly. "You already were," she replied. "I just didn't know." And then, like a breeze that passes and never returns, it dissolved into light. Yamashita reached out his hand, but there was nothing left to hold. Just the echo of laughter, disappearing into the trees. He stood there for a long time, looking at the water. Then he turned and started walking back. The return. The dojo was as it always was, the smell of wax on the mat, the distant sound of voices on the street, the wind blowing through the sliding doors. But something had changed. Rina was there, practicing alone. When he saw him, he stopped. "Sensei," she said, bowing. "You disappeared." "I was here," he replied, entering. "I always have been." She frowned, but didn't ask anything else. Yamashita grabbed a bakken from the wall and twirled it in his hands, feeling its familiar weight. "Let's train," he said. Rina hesitated. "Aren't you going to watch it today?" Yamashita smiled. "Not today." And for the first time in decades, he wasn't teaching. It was just there, completely, entirely present. The emptiness no longer haunted him. It was just space. And space, after all, was where it all began.